Welcome to the Fantasy Source Football Podcast. My name is David A. Arnott, sitting here with George Winkler. Week 1 in the books.
Week 1 in the books. 14 quarterbacks went over 300 yards passing, including Cam Newton.
Oh, let's not talk about Cameron so much. We will talk about him. I'm flabbergasted. Absolutely flabbergasted. A guy that looked that terrible during the preseason. Nobody doubts that the guy is an athlete, unparalleled athlete on the Panthers, and yet threw for something like 42% of his completed 42% of his passes during the preseason. Looked awful, was overthrowing guys, terrible footwork. Then goes out against the Arizona Cardinals, 422 passing yards, ran for a touchdown, looked poised, was getting, I believe the stat of the day was 40% of his passes went for a first down or a touchdown, something along those lines. Most yardage ever for a rookie debut quarterback passing, beating out Otto Graham.
I think the word that comes to mind is shocking. I mean, the way that this guy was just zoning in on tight ends during the preseason, throwing the ball at the feet of receivers.
Yeah. And then 10 yards downfield.
Yeah, and all of a sudden he comes out in week 1 and he's getting the ball to wide receivers.
Keep in mind, we're in Charlotte, so we saw all of these preseason games. I mean, it's one of the craziest things. I
mean, suddenly Steve Smith doesn't look lost, his fantasy value. Maybe there's something left for D'Angelo and Jonathan Stewart. He hit the tight ends in the preseason, so maybe he comes back for them later. But that said, I still see him as a backup quarterback in fantasy. Definitely worth picking up this week, but he has Green Bay at home this week. That's going to be a lot tougher than Arizona.
Would you place him as high as a top 15 fantasy quarterback now, so that those crazy 16 team leads might consider picking him up?
Yeah, I would consider him definitely has a chance to do that. I mean, Ryan Fitzpatrick was around that level last year, and I think Cam, with his running ability, that adds to his fantasy value. So, yeah, he's worth picking up. Let's get him. But like I said, don't rush him into your lineup this week against the Packers. 422 yards aren't going to happen.
I would argue in standard 12-team leagues, if you don't already have him on a flight of fancy, I wouldn't really bother, considering that if you've already drafted a quarterback, odds are you got one of those top 7 guys. There's no real need to pick up Newton in favor of another backup, like, say, Kyle Orton, who's going to be out there. I'd say moving forward, Orton's probably a better bet, but Newton clearly has a higher ceiling.
Higher ceiling, and he could be the perfect tonic for some of those Peyton Manning owners who are smarting a bit right now.
Anybody else surprise you over the weekend that you looked at that you thought to yourself, man, that was crazy what happened? I know I was just very happy to have Cadillac Williams in one of my leads where I was missing Arian Foster. I'm a little bit worried about Foster next week. Glad I got Williams late in the draft, and he might actually get the start next week. Yeah,
Steven Jackson has a quadriceps injury, missed most of the game in week 1, looks doubtful for week 2 against the Giants. Carnell got all the carries once Steven went out of the game.
I'm going to have to apologize for calling him Pontiac Williams all this time.
Pontiac Williams, I think he might run like a Porsche for a couple of weeks, but he might be back to a Pontiac after he wears down because he has a checkered injury past, of course, and I'm not sure how much he'll be able to take that much carries in the long run.
Now, there was also a scare. I mentioned Arian Foster. That's its own whole thing with Derek Ward and Ben Tate both jumping in, and Ward perhaps being hurt. But the Texans also got another injury scare when Kevin Walter, their second wide receiver, hurt his shoulder. It looked like it would be terrible, but it doesn't look like it's going to be that long. Jacoby Jones seemed to be the guy that a lot of people wanted to have that second target status anyway. What are you seeing with that situation?
Well, Jacoby Jones is the perennial fantasy sleeper who never quite lives up to expectations, but with Kevin Walter out of the way for multiple weeks, I think the initial report was 10 to 12 weeks with a broken shoulder. That gives him a lot of opportunity and a great passing offense opposite Andre Johnson, so he's going to get favorable coverage. And they get to take on a Miami team that Tom Brady just torched, so That secondary looked really vulnerable to no-huddle offense and getting spread out on the field. So if Houston goes to a big passing game this week, Jones could be an immediate fantasy factor.
Talking about big passing games, for a more sure thing, I think at least, maybe you can weigh in on this, the Saints are going to be missing Marcus Colston for a while. They're also probably going to be missing Lance Moore, if I read the reports correctly. That opens the door for all sorts of possibilities. Guys that might not have actually been on teams at the beginning of the week should be on teams. I know that in our Experts League there was an absolute stampede trying to get Devery Henderson.
Yeah, I mean, the Saints, the problem with them was always spreading the ball around, but now that you take two of their main guys out of the picture, suddenly it gets pretty intriguing there. Marcus Colston is expected to miss at least 4 weeks with a broken collarbone. And then Lance Moore has the groin injury and is questionable for this week. So you'll have Meacham perhaps moving into a number one role. Devery Henderson, who should be available in most leagues, moving into a number two. Henderson got off to a great start against Green Bay, known mostly as a deep threat. But like I said, now that he's, some of the options are gone there, he could have more of an impact.
Now, would you compare the two of them, Jacoby Jones, Devery Henderson? Who's more favorable in your mind?
I think Devery Henderson, simply because I think Drew Brees is better than Matt Schaub, and the quarterback play in that game Thursday night between the Packers and Saints was just amazing. And if I have a chance to latch onto that offense, I'm going to do it any way I can.
Any chance that Darren Sproles gets a boost in value because of this, especially in PPR leagues where, if you're hurting for a running back, you might look to him instead of, say, Danny Woodhead in that role?
Yeah, I like Darren Sproles a lot. He's filling in for Reggie Bush there and doing what he did with the punt returns, kick returns, out of the backfield. It's hard to predict, though, when those guys are going to have great value. The team has to fall behind and has to be in a lot of passing situations for Sproles to be effective as a fantasy factor. But, it was kind of obvious to see that the Packers-Saints game was going to be pretty high scoring and was going to be competitive. So in a situation like that, you would want to start Sproles as a flex back.
All right, let's wrap this up. Any other situations that you think bears watching moving forward?
Yeah, I think it bears watching the San Diego kicker situation. Nate Kading knocked out on the first play of the year.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to be a powerful offense, so you want the kicker.
You want the kicker. There have been several guys mentioned this week, so just keep an eye on that. The tight ends in Baltimore, Dixon and Pitta. Dixon had a nice game in week 1. They're filling in for Todd Heap, and Joe Flacco looked really great right out of the gate, so that's somebody to watch for your bench. And then in Arizona, you have Early Doucette and Andre Roberts trying to fight opposite of Larry Fitzgerald. Doucette gets the upper hand early. Am I ready to put these guys on my team right now? Probably not, but they are situations to watch.
Yeah, I mean, and history in Arizona being that they have this coaching staff has not been afraid to throw the ball a lot. And you know what? They don't really have much of a running game. They could very easily put the offense on Kevin Cobb's shoulders and say, find out who can catch the ball.
It's a perfect situation for fantasy owners looking for those sleeper pickups that they can put on their bench, squirrel away until the bye weeks, and then when things get a little thinner, maybe these guys will work out for you.
All right, George, thanks for joining us.
All right, thank you.